So today I wanted to show you an example of a project you could do with tessellation. And tessellation is an idea in mathematics. It has to do with tiling. So if you're familiar with tiles, you might imagine tiles going like this. Whenever you have a repeating pattern, you can have tiles that aren't repeating, but they're a little bit more complicated. But anytime you have things like this that are fitting together, it's called a tessellation. And there's a cool thing you can do with to make something that's a little bit more complicated than just squares, and it's called a translation tessellation. So the idea is that if you start with a shape, so we'll be using a rectangle, you want to create a sort of symmetry in two directions so that when you lay them next to each other, they're fitting together in two different directions. And so basically the idea is you take something like a square or a rectangle and you make a shape, and you can cut that out and then you move it and glue it to the other side. So you have the shape like this. And then you do the same thing to to the side that's 90 degrees opposite, and move that piece to the other side. And then when you look at the piece with the parts that have been translated and glued on, you have this really interesting shape. So it becomes this shape. That's not a square, but when you cut it out and you trace and you put them together, they will all fit together just like this kind of tile. So that's the idea behind what I'm going to do. So let's start. What you need for this is some paper to draw on, also some paper that ideally you're going to use for the tiling to trace it. And I just use like a little bit thicker cardstock or something like that. You could use something like cardboard, but it may be overkill, but you can play around with it. And then you're also going to want some tape to tape the little pieces that you're moving around, and a pen or something. You can get really fancy with this, but I'm just going to show you kind of a quick and dirty way to do it. So we're going to start with our rectangle, and another thing is you can start with just abstract shapes and then decide if you want to make it into something that's a little bit more figurative, or you could just keep it abstract. So let's see, I think I'm going to do something like this. Now you can draw it, you don't have to go all the way to the edges. It's a little bit easier if you do in some ways, because then it's easier to translate it accurately. But you could do something like this too. I'm just going to want to, when I cut this piece out, I'm going to want to move it so that it's the same position. So now I've got my little piece, and I'm going to cut it out along the lines here. And this is, it's not something that I do a lot, but I really like thinking about how surprising the result is when you do some simple moves that have to do with symmetry. So you can see here now, I've cut out this one part, and now I'm just going to translate it to this. I'm not actually going to tape it yet because I want to cut out this other piece, so I'm just going to set that down. I'm going to cut out the second piece. So now we have our template that is kind of an interesting shape, and we can use it to make a tessellation. And so because of the way we constructed it, if we flip it this way, or translate it, it's a translation, it translates in two directions. And so if you just take a plain piece of paper now to do your tessellation onto, you could start partway through, like maybe you could start from the edge if you want it to go to the edge, and you can just start on the where the you taped it so that it starts. But I'm actually going to just start in the middle and then just do a tessellation that goes part of the way out, not all to the way to the edge. And you can also take a look at your template and decide if it looks like something to you, because then once you have the tessellation, you can draw and fill it in. And I'm trying to decide, does this look like anything? Maybe, I'm not sure yet. But maybe I'll do it this way. It seems like that wants to be something. Now, one thing you can do is put a little bit of a roll of tape underneath so it stays in place while you're tracing, and that helps a bit. And then you can pick it up, because you're going to be picking it up and moving it. So you can trace it with pencil if you want and then go over it later, but we're just going to go ahead and trace and try and do it carefully, so that again you can make it nicer later, but you don't want it to really differ from the edge. You want to get it right on the edge so that you have a crisp line that's faithful to the shape. So I started up here, so I'm going to keep going around. This side was a little sloppy there. All right, so I have one done. So there we go. Now, here's the cool part. Check it out. It fits. Yay! So that's the whole idea here, is that you can just match it right in. Looks like, yeah, that's okay. It's okay that it's not matching perfectly. Actually, this tape's getting in the way, so I'm just gonna like put that aside. I think I can do it without the tape. So, but you want to match it and then trace around to the new position. And this one, like you saw, it was just kind of like a random line, but you may have seen some of these if you're familiar with MC Escher. He did a lot of tessellations and would end up drawing different creatures that were repeated, and sometimes he did very complicated ones that weren't just translation like I'm doing today, but actually rotating and working in that direction too. And that's a bit more complicated. But you can see here, they're just gonna fit together really nicely. It's kind of satisfying. these, which are these dual brush pens, and they're in really light grayscale colors, which I use for storyboarding, and they're awesome to work with for shading and things. So with these I can play around with adding some volume and texture to the shapes. Okay, so my camera stopped recording before I was done filling in everything, but you can see this is where I ended up. So it turned into this weird kind of frog-like pile of creatures together. Yeah, it's all based on tessellations that are created with the translation. So taking one shape and translating it to the opposite corner on two sides. And yeah, I guess it could have been like a weird alien squirrel or some sort of squid fish. I don't know, but yeah, it's a fun thing to try, and hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you. Bye.